Time Thief is a rank 4 strategy that, for the most part, has been forgotten to time, with its last pieces of support failing to resolve any of its issues and leaving them to fade into obscurity, with their greatest impact on the game's legacy being that Redoer is a generically summonable rank 4 that occasionally sees play. While a lot of Xyz strategies, especially rank 4 strategies, struggle to distinguish themselves in gameplay, Time Thief sets itself apart with its unique gimmick. Sadly though, Time Thief is a world premiere archetype, which for some reason means an archetype that's doomed for mediocrity at best, and complete obscurity on average, with competent archetypes seemingly being the exception rather than the rule. Most world premiere archetypes are at least interesting wastes of potential, and Time Thief is no exception to said squandered potential. So what is it that's so fascinating about Time Thief in particular? Well, that would be the empty promise that Redoer's effect poses. Redoer has the unique gimmick of gaining access to different effects based on the card types of materials he detaches, said card types referring to monster, spell, or trap. Redoer also has the ability to swipe a card from the top of your opponent's deck during the standby phase, which can help facilitate said effects. Stacking a card back to the top of the deck without targeting is insanely powerful, but it's not likely to be live. Since traps aren't prevalent in the game nowadays, you aren't ripping one off the top of your opponent's deck on average. Of course, you could make him with trap monsters, or attaching traps by other means, but the archetype itself struggles to support that game plan. His spell effect to draw one is neat, but that has the same issues, while not being all that game-changing. So his monster effect has to pull serious weight, because it's the one you'll always have access to, but unfortunately it doesn't. His ability to interdimensional transport away is nice, but making a rank 4 that can phase in and out of play isn't really that useful as a tool in a competitive environment. But in any low-powered format, he's extremely annoying. This would be okay if he was a powerhouse in his native archetype, but I wouldn't be making this video if that were the case. Unfortunately, Time Thief's design infrastructure doesn't make him much better. Perpetua is the only competent card that helps set up Redoer, being able to easily get any card type you want underneath Redoer as a quick effect. The problem is, the deck isn't very good at making more than one rank 4, but even if they could competently make both consistently, this doesn't account for the deck's other sad reality. Redoer Perpetua control is not a real game plan, so you'll only get one crafted use of Redoer out of her, and nothing else. She can revive a Time Thief from grave, but it's only during the standby phase. You can make her and recoup a Redoer in grave, who will also trigger in standby, but setting up another stack back to your opponent's deck is an absolutely pathetic game plan to retaliate with, letting your opponent have their entire turn to play through a single disruption. It's far too weak, and it's unfortunately the best the deck can muster. She can, and likely intends to revive main deck Time Thief cards, but that's an issue we'll get to later. Their other Xyz doesn't alleviate concerns either. As I said, the deck isn't very competent at making more than one rank 4, so banking on a world where you can make 3 is asking a bit much. And Double Barrel does not provide better interruption than Redoer. It functions similarly to Redoer, but it only activates its effect in response to a card or effect activation from your opponent, giving you far less leeway to actually use it offensively. As I said with Redoer, the monster effect is the effect that's always going to be live, so it has to be good in order for the card itself to be good. Double Barrel's monster-related effect is to gain 400 attack. That's it. The spell effect lets you brain control a monster, and the trap effect lets you negate an effect monster, meaning this card is entirely worthless without Perpetua. But there's another issue, of course. Since they're designed as hard once per turns, you have to apply all effects at once. They could have made them one of each per turn, but apparently that would have been too good. I don't imagine you care to apply Double Barrel's attack gain separately, but in the case of Redoer, the monster effect and trap effect are two effects you'd like to be able to use on separate occasions. Since you can't, the already middling effects of the Time Thieves become clunkier than they should be, especially in the case of Double Barrel, that can only use them in direct response to a card activation. Double Barrel doesn't impress and only serves to disappoint. If the deck could reliably make all 3 of them, and set up both it and Redoer with all their effects, the deck would have a game plan. Not a good one, but one nonetheless. Since it doesn't even get that far, they all just end up looking pathetic. The gimmick is far too underdeveloped, and their game plan around it is even less so. It certainly doesn't help that both Double Barrel and Redoer have to detach for their effects. It sure would be a shame if there were an easily summonable monster that could invalidate both effects. Uh-oh. Now that we're thoroughly disappointed with the payoffs, it's time to talk about the unique setbacks of the deck based on other issues. The deck revolves around psychic and machine monsters, with our human cast being the psychics, and the machines being the devices that they use in their journey through time. Also, all their monsters are dark. While Orcus doesn't get in the way necessarily, it's not like they synergize with Time Thief or help the deck make rank 4s reliably. They don't really get unique use out of generic machine support either. So that leaves us to analyze the generic support for the other half of the deck to rely on. They're psychic. One of the best cards in the game is psychic related. Let's just read the fine print on this card. Oh, right. The decision to make a rank 4 psychic archetype highlighted a cruel fate, losing out on the most useful psychic support in the game. Not sure I'd want an E-tally for 4s, but it certainly hurts to see here. With the deck losing out on generic support to fill their gaps on both ends, there's far more burden on the cards being extremely competent themselves. And unfortunately, they aren't. Winder is their only card that I can't say a bad thing about in gameplay. Why doesn't he have a standalone Xyz counterpart? Why does Bro need parental supervision in the extra deck? To add to this, Redoer doesn't have a standalone main deck counterpart either, which is weird considering he's the face of the deck. In gameplay, Winder is the face of the main deck, since he lets you add a Time Thief card on summon. You could special summon him by detaching a material from an Xyz you control. This type of design can be good, but as I've said, the deck isn't good at making multiple Xyz, and that's because they struggle to make one in the first place, leaving him to be an overall solid card, but left hampered by lacking competent help in the main deck. Adjuster is an extender you can summon from hand after summoning another Time Thief. Sound design logic so far. She then sends a Time Thief from deck to grave on summon. Of course, they have cards with grave effects, so this makes sense. However, the frontal lobe of whoever designed this card collapsed during the last sentence. In this rank 4 strategy that struggles to make more than one rank 4, you have to choose between being able to summon a level 4, the thing the deck has to do to work, or sending a card to grave, the thing the deck wants to do as a part of its game plan. I don't see any fallacies in that design. Unfortunately, Adjuster is the last of our main deck psychics, so you'd hope that the device portion of the archetype actually supports them on their mission. We might as well start with Bezel Ship, since its name might clue you in on what happened to the funding for their tech. By tributing itself, it can take a card from your opponent's grave and slide it under a Time Thief Xyz. This does help set up the card type effects for your Xyz, sort of. It's not like you can control when your opponent has a specific card type in grave, but it's still nice to have regardless. Seeing as it's a quick effect, it can be used to disrupt the grave and hold a card hostage. It also has another effect. Every device has a graveyard revival effect, but with different summoning conditions. Bezel Ships is detaching a material from an Xyz you control. They also have the clause that they get banished if they leave the field after using this effect. This philosophy is nothing out of the ordinary in Xyz archetypes. The banish effect is skirted around by using them for an Xyz summon, so you're only really able to abuse these cards in the environment that they're already intended for. This makes sense for most decks, but considering the contextual design of the archetype, this just comes across as making the deck worse for no reason. Since these cards want to use their tribute effects and aren't reliable to get on field outside of this effect. None of the devices have a way to summon themselves except from grave, and the deck has very few ways to even put them in grave. The only way to do so is with a card that has a 1 effect per turn clause, which means setting back your ability to make Xyz in the first place. And when you consider the fact Bezel Ship's summon clause requires you already control an Xyz, you can't even combo it with her. Add to the fact Bezel Ship is the only quick effect, so cards like Perpetua that can get them out on your opponent's turn don't do much of anything, since all you get from it is a single graveyard disruption. This design philosophy of the machines being supportive effects exclusively would be fine if there weren't two psychics. Because Winder and Adjuster are all they have for playmaking, and Adjuster isn't very good, their ability to function on a fundamental level is shot. While Bezelship certainly isn't bad in a vacuum, it sadly is bad in the context of the archetype's existing infrastructure, which means the other devices have it even worse. Regulator is their best machine, and yet it barely functions. You contribute it to summon out two thieves from deck. This can summon Adjuster and Winder. Since it doesn't negate the cards it summons like most Rescue Rabbit effects, you get both of their effects off, Winder's Search and Adjuster's Mill, going +2 if you squint when you look at the cards you can send. This is the deck's best way to actually make a rank 4, so of course, it's also completely dysfunctional with poor design. Allow me to draw your attention to the first 6 words on this card. Xyz. Unlimited Xyz. But no Xyz. So, in this archetype that wants you to summon multiple Xyz, their best card for doing so actively doesn't help accomplish that. Great stuff. If the deck were actually competent at making multiple rank 4s, let alone one, this design restriction might have been mildly frustrating but acceptable. But since it's the only way the deck can do so competently, it's an active insult to you for playing the deck. This is all without mentioning the biggest elephant in the room. This is a normal summon in a deck with no other good normal summons or free extenders. It is also the easiest Ash of all time. What do you expect to happen? It's not like you can chain Adjuster to the summon of Regulator, because that means you can't use its effect in the first place. So your only way to push through this is with another card that we'll get to. Regulator also doesn't have the benefit of being a potential comeback card. If it was easy to summon from grave, if your field was wiped during the previous turn, it'd be a great starter for a comeback. But since its summon condition is tied to your Xyz monster being destroyed in battle, you're never summoning this card to any actual effect. Its tribute isn't a quick effect either, so even if there were worthwhile summons to then use as an interruption, it can't even manage that. It's a card designed to make the deck work, but is also subsequently designed to get ashed. They set this archetype up for failure. Chronocorder is one of the worst cards I've ever seen in my life. It's designed to give you reflect damage, but only during your opponent's turn, and only during the battle phase you use its effect, making it light burn damage on average, and on occasion, a statement to your opponent that I can't say verbally. Chronocorder's revival window is also another inopportune one, being when a Time Thief Xyz leaves the field by a card effect, implying this is a payoff for using Redoer's tag-out effect. Nothing about this card provides help with the deck's game plan. Our last piece of technology is Temporal, the last monster printed for the archetype 3 years ago. It's an SP for its tribute effect. Not exactly insane, but it would be pretty useful. Of course, if it was a quick effect. Since it isn't, it's extremely susceptible to being interrupted itself. If that wasn't bad enough, its graveyard summon clause doesn't make it any more appealing. By returning a Time Thief to hand, you can special it from grave. Xyz are not cards that return to your hand, but even if you were to get use out of that, you can't, because it's a conditional and if you do. Then there's also the other machines, that if you bounce off their grave effects, get banished. This card actively does not synergize with the fundamental design of the archetype. There is no benefit to bouncing your psychics since you're trying to make rank 4s with them, and you're fighting to even get them on the field. You aren't bouncing the other devices that haven't summoned from grave because you want them in grave or on field, not hand. This card is a mediocre effect slapped onto a card that straight up doesn't work with the deck itself. Good thing this was their last piece of monster support, so we're left with a bunch of machines fit for the scrapyard. The Spell and Trap lineup aren't anything too hopeful either. Power Reserve is the last card printed in the archetype, releasing shortly after Temporal, and despite that fact, this card didn't really justify its existence. Power Reserve is a trap card. I think that's all I need to say, honestly. But further analyzing the card makes it clear just how frustrating it is. It's a trap monster. which with the context of the Xyz is great on paper, but since you can't flip it immediately, you're quite literally better off using Shade Brigandine. It does summon another Time Thief from just about everywhere save for the banishment, but as you'll recall, none of the other cards have high impact effects being summoned off this. Considering it's going to be activated during your opponent's turn, it doesn't really do anything. If it immediately performed an Xyz summon after, then this card would have been perfectly fine. But since that sort of design principle was too far off, and I guess Time Thief isn't allowed to be ahead of its time, we have a card that helps the deck if you just don't think about it for more than a second. It does have a good grave effect that permanently banishes a card, unlike Temporal. The issue is you have to have a Time Thief Xyz with both a spell and a trap attached to it to use this effect. It's a card that could have use if the deck it was supporting wasn't completely dysfunctional. Flyback is another card that helps with attaching spell traps to your Xyz. It even has a grave effect to swipe a card from your opponent's grave for another material. But of course, it's a trap card. The inherent slowness poses a problem that the deck's overall design simply decides to ignore. It can very well meet Power Reserve's criteria by itself. The thing is, it's also a 1 effect per turn. On a trap card, this deck can't be allowed to have anything, huh? Their last trap is Retrograde, a perfectly solid card. It's just a spell trap negate that attaches said card to a Time Thief Xyz you control. There's not a whole lot to say about it other than it has an understanding of what the archetype intends to do, while also providing a useful tool for the deck. Sadly, the rest of the deck didn't have that understanding. Time Thief isn't a trap deck, so its ability to string all of these together reliably is lacking. And none of the design in the Xyz summoning plays off it. You're basically set up to pray you can summon a rank 4, then pray you get the right traps to build off that. It's all disjointed and doesn't lead to a functional game plan. All that's left to discuss are the 2 spells. First, we have Startup, a card so bad that it needs a dueling skill in order to fix its very existence. A card that specials a monster from hand exclusively is never good. When you can just add this or a Time Thief to hand for free, sure, this is tolerable, but not in the actual physical game where you have to draw this card without a free pairing. It's a card that just has you go minus for the sake of making the deck perform its basic function. Of course, a secondary grave effect could excuse this design, since it gives you an extremely basic means of getting it there while still doing something productive to your game plan. However, that was not the thought process behind the design of this card. You can only use 1 Time Thief startup effect per turn, and only once that turn. Some people should not be allowed to design cards. A Rescue Rabbit with design that actively harms the deck. Cards with asinine 1 effect per turn restrictions. A spell that summons from hand only, all in a rank 4 strategy. Is this just a formula for archetypes Konami hates? The grave effect also isn't very good in practice. While getting all 3 card types under an Xyz is what you want, the fact that it uses cards from grave and isn't an up to, meaning all 3 have to be present to use it, it's too slow and clunky to set up, and it's the only card that achieves the full sweep at once. Their only other spell is Hack. When looking over the archetype's theming in the wiki, I saw Hack's card art described out of context with the image. I then cracked up from the whiplash of reading it after all of the others. And that was the most remarkable thing to come out of looking at these cards. Hack gives your Xyz protection the turn they're summoned. Notably, this doesn't synergize with Redoer's return effect, because it's a return and not a summon. And to rub further salt in the wound, the card has to resolve first in order to provide said protection, so you have to activate it before you summon the Xyz. But the only way to search it is with a card that wants you to already have made an Xyz. Just play 3 copies of a card that doesn't help you advance your plays. Hack also lets you boost an Xyz by 300 for each material attached to it, and if one of them is a card that belongs to your opponent, it can attack directly. It has okay utility effects, but the deck doesn't need utility. It needs functionality. Most cards that provide this sort of utility tend to also provide archetypes with a search or summon effect, because the card isn't very useful outside of the scenario where you've already fully set it up. It's just not very good, as has been evidenced throughout. So how do we even go about adapting Time Thief to a modern standard? For starters, apology erratas for Startup and Adjuster. Konami absolutely refuses to use erratas to buff cards, but it's the only way to make these cards useful. At least, not without taking a lot of convoluted steps to get around this mistake in card design. These cards really have no right to be one effect per turn cards, especially not in a modern setting. Turn 0 cards are the only way to somewhat make up for their design. Turn 0 cards are fitting for Time Thief, but they need to do a lot to be worthwhile. If they bin a card from deck, it could send startup and get around its clause of not being used the turn it's sent. It still has the logistical issue that you need to get all 3 types in grave, but you can actually use the effect. If they get more cards that load up the grave in general, these sorts of cards do improve. If they're cards that summon themselves, they could take notes from K9 and also perform an Xyz summon. Adjuster is a turn 0 card if you can summon on your opponent's turn, making it entirely possible to Xyz summon during your opponent's turn. The thing is that none of their Xyz progress their plays, highlighting how they should have new ones that actually do. Most Xyz archetypes tend to have one since the deck is designed to Xyz summon, obviously, so they can then bolster their consistency and offense. Time Thief by itself can't really do that. Winder is the only searcher, making it really hard to see all the cards that you need. Not that you really need most of them, considering their quality. While a single detonator can wipe out the entire deck, it is a rank 4 strategy that you could play alongside it. Notably, Plugin is a card for Time Thief, a quick play that can summon Xyz from grave or banishment, then attach a Ryziel card from deck to it. This lets you summon back Redoer after using his effect, while also giving you the ability to slap any card type underneath him. The only issue is the once per turn that prevents you from using it that turn. While a synergy is a bit flubbed, Ryziel still does fill a lot of holes with the archetype, namely putting a ton of 4s on field, but the fact that they can also help put spell traps underneath your Xyz does make it feel a little less shallow. Time Thief could hypothetically synergize with Materiactor well, since they do use cards to attach spell traps and even recur them, but they're a rank 3 strategy, so you're just better off sticking with Ryziel. Other than the spell and trap concerns with their design, Hack poses another element of their design to play off of, controlling cards that belong to your opponent for more benefits. This gives more importance to Redoer and Bezel Ship snagging materials, as well as Double Barrel's brain control effect. It's an element to the design that can be used as a balancing measure to limit just how generically they can be used. In terms of future Xyz for the archetype, other than a standalone for Winder, Double Barrel implies there could be pair-ups for all of them, Perpetua and Redoer as well as Perpetua and Winder. But since none of the existing ones are consistency cards and are psychic, they could design machine Xyz that are, and also providing them with design that's able to better utilize the main deck machines, potentially with the ability to apply the tribute effect of a machine that's attached to it as a quick effect, making Temporal's Banish a quick effect, and Regulator to get you another Xyz without your board needing to be empty. Of course, also making any future main deck machines useful through these cards. An element behind Time Thief's design is based around time itself, obviously. The deck and the extra deck represent the future, something you can't tangibly see, but you know is there. The field and hand represent the present, everything you can see right in front of you. Then the grave and banishment represent the past, things that either linger or slip from memory. With this in mind, the deck needs to have its design more flexibly weave between all of these areas. Present to future could be represented with a quick play that allows you to rip a card off the top of the turn player's deck, then Xyz summon with it and a Time Thief that you control, allowing the deck to make a rank 4 both with one monster on field and with the ability to involve a spell or trap while also potentially building upon taking your opponent's cards. There could very well be more cards that function like this, but with other time frames. Of course, knowing how prone Konami is to just printing individual cards that do everything, it's not out of reason to see a card that sends, adds, and summons different Thief cards, sending up all 3 time frames in one. I would just hope that this isn't the only card they'd receive, since all it would do is be a card that eats Ash instead of Regulator, or vice versa. A unique take on time in the context of the deck can be in going first or second. having more useful effects in the context that you're going second. This is a principle I think should be more common in general, but it especially fits with Time Thief as it ties into what time frame they're currently in, granting the deck ways to be more resilient in those given scenarios. Another way to play on time in gameplay is with different benefits based on phases. Either something in a similar vein to Sangenkaimen that provides the ability to apply multiple effects in a given phase, or a card that triggers a different effect during each phase. Of course, formatting a card with every phase in one text box would be a nightmare. Good thing there are cards with 2 text boxes. This way, it can move in and out of scale at a point and provide more follow-up for the deck's game plan. Other than that, this is one archetype where I can't really recommend using Pendulum for anything. Since they're only spells while scaled, Time Thief can't take advantage of them also being spells for their Xyz, unfortunately. To further add to this idea of an importance of phases, we could take and further iterate on the philosophy of Goblin Bikers. Both Gabonga and Gone Wild have powerful effects if an Xyz material is detached. They could be cards that apply different effects if a material is detached or attached in a given phase. Since the act of detaching or attaching a material is an act of moving one time frame into another, it fits thematically. It's also a better way to balance out effects without making them hard once per turns. Though, if they were to do this, I imagine it would probably be a continuous spell that focuses on standby and main, so as to not bloat a card with effects for draw, battle, and end as well. The more likely and simplest direction, though, is the Sangenkaimen route. It also provides a sort of equivalent to the Xyz card type effects, but by using phases instead of card types. Though, since Time Thief isn't a battle phase oriented strategy, I can see them leaning into standby and main, since they already have a fixation on the standby phase. Putting further emphasis on it helps set the deck's design apart, and potentially open up unique strengths for it being able to make important actions during the standby. Of course, getting to work around cards like Talents and Thrust. One way to resolve the deck's issue with getting specific materials under their Xyz is by designing an Xyz that does it on summon, then can tag into another Time Thief Xyz while transferring its materials. I think it'd be a good fit for Winder's standalone Xyz counterpart, doing all the groundwork to get things moving for the deck, attaching a spell and a trap, then allowing for you to make Redoer or Double Barrel with all their effects live. It wouldn't hurt to include design to incentivize leaving him on field too. He could be designed to detach a material to add to hand, functionally being another search card like his main deck counterpart, but as a card you can always make. Then he could tag out into another Xyz during the standby phase to match and combo with Redoer and Perpetua's standby effects. Time Thief could also just lean into being a trap deck. The traps aren't entirely useless, but the deck hardly supports them. Winder is the only way to search them out, so designing the deck to have more ways to support them helps. But the other issue is that they don't provide a clean bridge from trap to monster to help them actually Xyz summon. Power Reserve pretends it does, but there needs to be more support to actually bring out that connection. Trap monsters have been on the rise lately, from Temple of the Kings to Argo Stars, with Silhouette Rabbit providing more reasons to toy around with them, and You're Finished being a unique board wipe for a long turn. Argo Stars revolves around using trap monsters that bounce in and out of the back row. They're also level 4s with a rank 4. While I don't think you can cram them into a list with Time Thief and get a functional deck, I do think that there's design elements to pull from them and further iterate on with Time Thief. If Power Reserve can convert to an Xyz summon, having more traps like it seems apt for the deck. They could even have grave effects to summon as monsters and perform an Xyz summon to build on the relation the deck has with the grave. An extremely basic fix to Time Thief could be designing spell and trap cards that just attach to an Xyz after they're activated. It'd also be a good opportunity to borrow design philosophy from Killer Tune. Both War and Playlist let you copy a synchro material effect of a Killer Tune. Time Thief could make cards apply the corresponding effect of the Xyz it attaches to, making a trap that flexes between being Redoer's non-targeting stack or Double Barrel's monster negate, then a quick play spell that does the same for their spell effects. It gives you a way around the effects being hard once per turns that are easy to miss out on, while also helping to facilitate them actually using it in the future. The last thing that Time Thief needs to build upon is the actual connection and support behind Psychic and Machine. Jinzo is a machine that has ties to Psychic. With the type being added later, it feels like Konami regrets the fact Jinzo isn't a Psychic. designing support that sort of connects the two types. While Jinzo is a 6 and won't help Time Thief, I do think if they decide to expand on this connection, not restricting it solely to Jinzo's leveling would be a great way to help Time Thief. Of course, I'd hope they design direct support for Time Thief to actually help the connection as well. Even something as basic as a new psychic that summons a machine Time Thief from deck, and maybe a machine that does the inverse. It gives the deck more powerful starters, but of course, as I've made clear with Regulator, they should also provide extensions so the deck can actually exceed summon effectively. I originally thought, oh, if you designed Ash Magnets that trigger on summon, that'd be great for Adjuster, because she could chain block them and protect their ability to summon from deck, unlike Regulator. But that's not how chain blocking works, apparently. Which is unfortunate, because chain blocking would be another neat take on Time Thief's design, functionally being a way to manipulate time itself so the opponent struggles to interrupt them. It's something to think about, but less appealing considering there's no real gameplay route as of now. While Time Thief may be a pretty underwhelming and forgettable deck, that's due to their design being phoned in. In spite of that, it's an archetype with a lot of interesting design principles that have just been left underdeveloped and unexplored. There are numerous ways to further iterate on their design and make them into a competent deck. For better or worse, we can't peer into the future and see that realized, but I can very well tell you it's entirely possible, so long as time is actually put into supporting this deck.